explainlikeimfive by Tatamaniac eli5. Why isn't it possible to cook, for example, cookies at twice the temperature for half the time? Obviously I know it isn't possible, but why? What's the physics behind it? When you put something in the oven, the outside heats first, and then the inside slowly absorbs heat from the outside. If you raise the temperature, the outside heats way faster but the inside still lags behind. In the most extreme scenario, the outside is burned while the inside isn't even warm. Like a microwave burrito. Food cooks by transferring heat from a source, for example oven, skillet, boiling water, etc., to the interior of the item being cooked. The speed of cooking is limited by the capacity of the food to conduct heat. The heat conducting capacity changes very little regardless of the heat source. Raise the temperature of the heat source, the food simply cooks faster at the surface, but not at its interior. The result is that the surface of the food is done much faster than the interior. This is good if you want a very rare steak, that is crispy brown surface with cool, red center. On the other hand, if you're going for medium rare, it's best to start with very high heat to brown the surface, then lower the heat to allow the interior to warm slowly while remaining moist and juicy. The same is true in baking. If you set the oven too high, the surface of your cake will char while the interior is still raw. Well, the inside does heat faster, but not fast enough to get to where it needs to be before the outside burns. The heat transfer equation is proportional to dt. So for thin items like pizza, high temperature works out okay. It doesn't work as well for things like bread or cake. The energy from the heat can't make it into the center of the cookie in half the time, and at the same time you're causing unwanted reactions in the outer part of the cookie by heating it too high, burning it. BC The entire cookie doesn't immediately become the same temperature. The outermost layers heat up first and continue to heat and as cook and then burn, while the inner layers are coming up to temperature more slowly. In scientific terms it's about heat transfer from the air in the oven to the dough. The dough is a solid and cannot be penetrated 100% immediately. It happens in layers and the heat is transferred from the outer to the inner layers. But at a higher temperature, the outer layers are still getting more heated all the time, which burns it before the inner layer can be cooked. The amount of time it takes heat to penetrate the cookie is always the same. So when you cook higher for less time, the inside doesn't get the heat before the outside burns. If you want a great illustration of the answer, cook a steak in a sous vide. You can set the water bath to 140°F and the steak will cook to perfect medium rare and then stay there. You can leave it for an hour or more and it won't overcook. That's because it's not about the time. Really it's about getting the internal temperature of the meat right. At a certain temperature, the proteins start to denature and change, giving it a cooked texture, and the proteins belonging to bacteria that may be living in the meat also denature, killing the bacteria and making the meat safe to eat. When it comes out, it has no crust, it's medium rare all the way through. Slap it in the cast iron or the grill at high heat for a minute on each side, and only the outside of the meat heats up really hot, cooking it past well done to a nice hot crispy burnt texture but not penetrating to the soft inside, which stays at the same 140 temperature and remains pink and tender. Pop it on a plate and there you have it, a perfect steak. Edit: I made myself hungry for steak but that ain't happening tonight. The material properties of heat propagation is covered by the other answers, but there's another thing you touched on that makes this question kind of impossible. What does twice the temperature mean? Doubling the degrees changes depending on where your 0 is. 10 degrees C doubled would be 20 degrees C, right? But in Fahrenheit those temperatures are 50 degree F and 68 degree F. The only absolute way to double temperature would be basing 0 at 0 degree K, but that would have a baking temperature of 350 degree F / 180 degree C / 453 degree K to 1160 degree F / 630 degree C / 900 degree K, which is quite ridiculous to expect in any conventional kitchen given that aluminum melts only 30 degrees C higher at 660 degrees C. Most of the kitchen's materials will be degrading pretty quickly. Upvote, because even though this is blatantly obvious, it never once occurred to me. My intuition would assume double the Fahrenheit and double the Celsius would have the same effect, just like double the atmospheres and double the pascals have the same effect, or like how double the meters and double the inches have the same effect. But yeah, if your measure differs not only in magnitude but also in where the origin point is, it's not. Because what you're doing is measuring the distance from zero in some kinds of units and doubling that distance, but when the meaning of from zero isn't the same, the thing you're doubling isn't the same. It's similar to how you can't eat all your veggies for the month in one sitting. You need time for it to clear your stomach and absorb into your body. Similarly, the goal is not to dump all the heat energy into a cookie as quickly as possible. It's to distribute heat in a certain way that leaves the right consistency in different parts, a little crisp on the outside, chewy or crispy on the inside, and the flour cooked throughout. It takes a certain pace of heat delivery for all the parts to reach this at the right time. Chemical compounds have a non-linear response to temperature. Things that are stable for very long periods of time at one temperature will decompose very quickly at higher temperatures. For example, the flash point or smoke point of cooking oils. You can heat the hell out of them, well under that point, for quite a while and not much will happen. But if you go over it, they will decompose and give off smoke and maybe even catch fire. If you tried to blast cookies at a really high temperature, the dough would just burn to carbon. You need to get the heat to conduct through your food to the center, which takes time because a solid material can't be stirred. If you expose the outside to a greater temperature, it may get scorched before the center is cooked because it dries up quickly, and without water there is nothing to limit the temperature. You'll want to look up something called the Biot number. This number is the ratio of heat transfer, how much heat into the surface of something, in this case, from the oven to the cookie, relative to how quickly that heat can go from the outside of the cookie to the inside. Thermal conductivity of the cookie. Imagine a case where the heat into the cookie is 10,000x higher than how quickly that same amount of heat could travel to the center of the cookie. You'd end up with a cookie that is very burnt on the outside, and raw cookie dough in the middle. Heat is just molecules bumping into each other faster. Heat that is too high is like using a battering ram to hammer in a nail. There's too much unnecessary force for what you're trying to do, so you burn it and destroy it instead of joining things together just right. To answer this, let's talk about toilets. Imagine that in a cold bathroom you have two toilets, one with a plastic seat, and one with a metal seat. When you sit on the plastic seat, it may feel a little cool, but otherwise not too bad. If you sit on the metal seat, it will feel horrifically cold, and you'll probably be concerned about the safety of your genitalia. They are in the same room and are the same temperature, but the metal one feels much colder. Why is that? It's because the heat in your butt is stolen much more quickly by the metal toilet seat. The plastic one steals the heat much more slowly. Cookies are like plastic toilet seats, especially ones made by my mother. She never really got the hang of cooking. The heat moves slowly into them. If the oven is too hot, by the time that the heat reaches the middle of the cookie and finishes cooking it, the outside will be burnt. It's because of the speed at which heat moves through the whole cookie. If you double the heat outside, you do not double the speed at which the heat moves through the cookie. Also, at certain temperatures you get chemical reactions on the outside that actually slow the speed at which heat moves through the cookie, so the recommended temperature to bake a cookie is often the optimum in regards to many factors. If the cookies you made were very thin, it is possible to speed up cook time with increased heat. Although they would cook quite quickly anyway, so the benefits of the increased heat would be minuscule. The incredibly simple explanation is the outside is exposed to a higher heat, so cooks quicker, but it takes time for heat to reach the center, and due to the extra heat the outside burnt in that time. Why not? It is called a microwave. I get the gist of the question, but it is possible. It is sad that few people actually understand how a microwave works. It is a magical beast that gets around so many evaporation corners in cooking. For your information, that power button on your microwave is a useful thing. This reminds of this Disney movie where these characters were prepping for a cooking show competition and one of the dudes tried to bake the cookies in half the time by increasing the temp and ended up burning them. Don't remember what it was called though. Well, double of 300 degrees isn't 600 degrees, but 1060 degrees. That's because absolute zero is minus 460 degrees. I imagine your cookies would be vaporized in a fraction of a second at 1060 degrees. Those are Fahrenheit. Celsius equivalents are 150 degree doubled is really 573 degrees. Heat needs time to spread from the surface to the core of something. If you make the temperature too high, the outside will burn before the middle gets to cook. Heat conduction. Every material, in this case dough, has a different rate at which it can transport heat, in this case into the inside of your cookie. If you have more incoming heat at the surface than the dough can conduct, you get more browning burning. The correct cooking temperature for pretty much anything is finding a balance between getting it hot enough in the center, while you don't burn the outside too much. You put it in at 400 degrees, but the maximum allowable temp of the material, cookie, is say 200 degrees. The cookie doesn't actually see 400 degrees. You make it 800 degrees and it'll hit 200 degrees on the outside way before the goal temp of the inside, say 150 degrees. Question: if you incubate hen's eggs at 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit, they hatch in 21 days. How many days would it take at 200 degrees Fahrenheit? First, heat conduction takes time. The outside heats first, and transfers that heat to the center. Second, there are multiple things that can happen to cookie dough at different temperatures. At about 370 degrees F is a reaction that makes a sweet, flavorful, crunchy brown crust. Above 400 degrees you get burning instead. So doubling the heat will burn the outside and probably not hit the target temperature in the center, way colder or hotter depending on when you stop.